Hello, and welcome to Follow Your Curiosity, where we explore the ups and downs of the creative process and how to keep it moving. I'm your host, Nancy Norbeck. I am a writer, singer, improv comedy newbie, science fiction geek, and creativity coach who loves helping right-brained folks get unstuck. I am so excited to be coming to you with interviews and coaching calls to show you the depth and breadth both of creative pursuits and creative people, to give you some insight into their experiences and to inspire you. If you've been listening for a while, you probably know that I've written a novel. What you may not know is that for a period of at least 10 years, I didn't write fiction at all. And when I started again, it was in no small part thanks to encouragement from my dear friend, Cindy Lynn Speer. Cindy Lynn is the sort of writer you often hear about, the one you can't stop. As you'll hear today, she started writing when she was 13 and was so frustrated with the books she was reading that she was quite sure she could do better. Once she began to experiment, she kept going. She's been a book reviewer, editor, author, and just about every other sort of wordsmith you can imagine. And she's about to release her latest book, The Key to All Things, on July 25th. Today we cover those early days of writing, the journey from college graduation to published novels, the perennial discussion of plotting versus writing by the seat of your pants, the importance of being kind to yourself in the creative process, and a whole lot more. Here's my conversation with Cindy Lynn Speer. Cindy Lynn, I'm so excited that you're here. I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
As have I. We've been friends for like centuries, so this is really great that we get to actually sit down and have a conversation about these kind of things. That
I know. You've got me doing the mental math now, and it's not centuries, but it's close enough. We'll just leave it there. So,
if you don't know the truth, hyperbole will do. That's the new standard.
That's true. That's very, very true. So for as long as I've known you, if you have ever told me how it is that you got started with writing, I have long since forgotten. So could you help us out there?
Absolutely. I got started in writing. It's actually a horrible story. It's very shady because I was reading this book and I thought, I could do better than this. And I was like 13. And so I found out that you could take notes, and if you were actually writing in class, it looked exactly like you're taking notes. So all the teachers really loved me because I would look up at them, but I'd be writing my story, and they would think, oh my God, she's hanging on every word that I say. And so as long as I kept my grades up, I was like, yes, I will just sit here and I will write stories, and I passed them out to my friends, and they were like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. And I was like, okay, maybe I can do this. So that's how I got started. Trying to make people happy and trying not to get into trouble, which is pretty much basically continues to be my life.
That sounds like a reasonable motto to me too. You're full of those today.
I'm full of a lot of things, but we won't say what.
Now I'm actually kind of jealous. I don't think I ever did that in class. I'm sure I wanted to. I'm not sure I ever had the nerve though. Study halls and stuff like that. Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think I ever did it in class. So I take it you never got caught.
Nope. And I always made sure to keep my grades up, except for in algebra. Algebra was hopeless. They all gave up on me fairly quickly.
I understand that feeling. So if your friends all loved everything you wrote, and you said, this is awesome, maybe I can do this, what came next?
Oddly enough, research, because I read this book by Barbara Hambly, who is a fantasy author, and she actually writes historical mysteries too. She's amazing. It was called Dragonsbane, and it was the first fantasy book I ever read. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of medievally. And so I thought, I would really love to write fantasy. And so I started checking out every book on medieval stuff I could. And one of the other things I would do in class when I couldn't be caught or study hall is I'd be outlining these books on medieval history. It doesn't really help me now. I don't write medieval time. I still enjoy the medieval stuff, but So I learned fairly early research, and then I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to become a librarian, because if I become a librarian, I will help people. And when I'm not helping people, I will read and I will research and I will write. And any librarian worth their salt, any librarian listening to this podcast right now is laughing their backsides off, because that's not what happens when you're a librarian.
Yeah, the perception and the actuality are fairly different there.
So I just kept on researching, and I went to college and got a degree in creative writing, partially because I thought I was going to go and become a librarian, and partially because I took this one class on the history of language for my degree, because I was just doing a regular English degree.
Mm-hmm.
And he made it so damn boring. I couldn't stand it. I literally changed my major to creative writing because this guy made the history of English so horrible. I was like, nope, I'm done. Bye.
That's criminal, because the history of English is fascinating.
It is. And I've started reading a book about, I had a couple of books I started reading, and then I shoved them on a shelf to put them somewhere safe.
Oh, that's the kiss of death.
Yes. So I have to go and search for them, because it is actually really interesting.
Yeah.
Formed. It's amazing. I think our language, I love English. It's just like, it might not sound as beautiful and romantic as Italian,
mm-hmm.
but it's like, it's such a, it's a very roguish language. It just steals from and does whatever it wants, and I love it.
It does, and that's why, I was going to say our vocabulary is bigger than your vocabulary, because we've stolen from everyone shamelessly. And then, I was just thinking while you were talking, like, who the language geeks are because they know what the great vowel shift is, or was, or that it exists. Like, there is a thing called the great vowel shift. And yeah. And, all of the Anglo-Saxon, Middle English, modern English, how Shakespeare is not written in Old English, no matter how hard you try to convince me. It's just not true. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a fascinating thing. And I'm sitting here thinking, bit colonial, really, because, well, the Brits were, and that's where half of these words come from. So
that's true.
Yeah. So it's got its dark side, but on the bright side, we have all these words to play with. So
I was trying to remember, there's a gentleman who used to do Beowulf in the original language.
Mm-hmm.
And he was amazing. It actually was interesting, but now I can't remember his name. It's, but anyway, I'm getting off topic.
That's all right.
The topic's all about me. No, it's not. I'm very boring. But anyway, save me from myself.
Well, you're not boring. But so if you decided that you wanted to write fantasy and do all this medieval research, what were you writing in class when you first started?
Well, I would write, I tried to write a murder mystery with a woman who was a ballerina and her shifty, horrible boyfriend. And it was very, remember I was 13. Mm-hmm. So it was very, very silly.
Right.
And then I had friends who, since my friends loved it so much, like if they had a band they really loved, I wrote them stories where they went on adventures with their band. The worst one, the one that I shouldn't confess to, I actually named Beauty and the Bono.
Oh boy, I remember those days. Boy, you're making me nostalgic now.
So, and because it was really nice, because I think what that time did was it made me realize that you could make people's lives better. Like, mm-hmm. And when I say that, I'm not saying like in some kind of huge way, but I've said before, I would really like to make people happier. Like, mm-hmm. because life is horrible a lot of times, right? It's boring, or you have a crappy day. And I wouldn't mind writing stories that people look forward to picking up.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe your day at work was crappy, but you have this book and it's got a story that you really like. And so you sit back, and for a little bit, I'm there for you. It's really my book that's there. I am making your life slightly better, because I really love that. Those were the stories that, even they were really goofy as all heck, and if they were found, it would probably be terrible blackmail. I'd probably pay my kidneys out to keep anybody from reading them again. But it taught me that it is a real pleasure to make people genuinely happy from reading your stuff. But I'm not really that comedian, right? Where, I can be funny, but it's very situational comedy. I think I'm very dry a lot of the time. So I can't write comedy books. So I just have to try and write really interesting books that people just look forward to finding out what happens.
And that's really what it's about, right?
Yes.
That's the whole point. You're reminding me again of high school, when one of my English teachers, and now I'm not 100% sure which one, talked about E.M. Forster's aspects of the novel, where he says, story is the question that asks what happened next, and plot is the question that asks why. But story is what keeps you reading the book. If you're not interested in the story, you're never going to finish the book.
No. And if you don't engage the author, you can have the best not author. Sorry. You don't engage the audience, you can have the most incredible message in the world, but they're not going to get to it.
Right. So did you share any of the things that you wrote with your teachers? It doesn't sound like it, but I'm
in
curious.
Class, yes. If I had it, mostly with my English teachers. And so I always shared. I had a really wonderful poetry teacher in college, and he found out I wrote poetry, and he's like, "Let me read some." And I'm like, "Oh, I can't. It's awful. It's not." I knew he was a Chaucerian scholar, so I'm like, "I know." It's like he said, "How will you know if it's you can't tell if it's really good because you're the one who wrote it."
Fair point.
You have to let people read it. It was so encouraging and wonderful. And so, and also I was really wise very early in my college career, because I realized, since I was a creative writing major, I could keep recycling the same story as long as I improved it and drafted it and made more chapters, right? I wasn't cheating. I just kept on using the same story and using all these professors to teach me how this book could work better. And I would just add chapters to the book, and I would just keep on trying to expand it. And the bones for the book I ran through a lot of my college career actually became my second published book, for the most part. It was stuck until I realized that my main character was not actually a vampire. And then, oh, okay.
That would make a difference, yeah.
And then it all fixed itself up, and I was able to finish the book. So, isn't
it amazing how, when you figure out the one thing that's off and you tweak it, it's like having a magic wand. It's like suddenly everything works better. It falls into place. It's like it could be anything. It could be that your character's not actually a vampire. It could just be that you put it together the wrong way. The story is good, but the right way to tell it hasn't happened yet. And when you figure that out, it's just it just comes out of you from nowhere. Have you noticed that too?
Yes. Actually, the book I'm just about to publish. I wrote an essay. I'm going to be on The Big Idea with John Scalzi. He does a blog post for people where you write an essay about the big idea of your book, the driving idea of your book. And so I was writing that today, and I remembered that the reason what started this was I was watching these movies where, you have these grand grand romances. The couples kept apart and then they reunite and everything's wonderful and everyone lives happily ever after. And there are these big, grand, amazing stories. And then I thought, well, what happens if that great love does not last forever? So I started writing a story a while back where the main character was the man in the story, and the great love of his life betrayed him. Ooh. And everybody knows their story. And the main female character, she had spent her whole young adulthood knowing this story, and that was the bar that she had set for romance. And now she's in his party. I forget why he was going to go do something brave to make his life better, and she was there with him. I don't know why. And I just didn't I couldn't figure out what I was trying to say outside of sometimes love sucks and everything's horrible. So then I got back to it. There was a snow day, and for some reason it had been churning in my head. And so I got to sleep in. I went to work in a really good mood. And during my lunch break, I was like, I know what happens. And so the story still is about Edward de Vere, who was the human captain of the King's Guard. And he fell in love with Catherine of the Willows, who threw him aside because she wanted to become the queen of the Fae. And their love was forbidden and all that good stuff, Mm-hmm. And the only story anybody hears, the only story. It's such a powerful story that there's no other songs, nothing, just about them, and tons of variations. And my main character's Avriel, who for 3 hours every night, she realizes that the story is actually totally wrong. Edward de Vere actually always detested Catherine, and he's actually her husband. So she's trying to figure out how to change the world in 3 hours every night, because the next day she doesn't remember anything. She's got notes she writes to herself, things you should do, 3 things I want you to do today. And she's like, I don't know why I'm listening to these notes, but I really have to, because awful things happen when I don't. And I feel really awful all day if I don't listen to these notes. So I guess, so it's all about the power of story. And, it's about, when you tell a story, you create a narrative, and we create narratives constantly, right? Mm-hmm. Fighting narratives now. She's fighting this narrative that this man is not her husband. She's actually an awful person, and Catherine of the Willows is amazing and adorable, and everybody loves her. And she's fighting that narrative, even though she often doesn't know why. You and I fight all sorts of narratives all the time. Like, I don't know why I'm on this podcast. I'm just blathering on like an idiot. Nancy is never going to want to talk to me again after this. Fight these narratives all the time. And, we've got a lot of brave people fighting some terrible cultural narratives right now as we speak. And so that's kind of what I was wandering into. So instead of it just being a story about, well, sometimes love doesn't work out the way we think it is, it really does become more about, the power of story over our everyday lives.
That is so deep that I have to ask you, because I suddenly realize I don't remember the answer to this question. And I'm sure that somewhere in the multiple hundreds of centuries that we've known each other, we've talked about this. But do you plot, or do you fly by the seat of your pants? Or do you do some of each?
I don't really plot much. I mean, sometimes when if I get an idea, I'll write it down, no matter what, even if I'm in the middle of another story, because I want to try and remember it. And I have all sorts of files in Scrivener where there's partial stories, and I'll sit down, and it's actually called Until the Thread Picks Up. And when I'm between stories, I'll just sit there and I'll pick a random story, and I'll sit there and see if I can write it. Because to me, the first draft of your book is the only time you get to surprise yourself. It's the only time you get to be the reader.
Yes.
So I tend to just let myself just write and go. And usually, a lot of times, I'll have a rough idea. like when I wrote The Chocolatier's Wife, that was one of those books that just all of a sudden I was eating chocolate and I was thinking about an obscure actor I liked, and boom, the whole story just came right out. It was like I wrote obsessively on it for like 2 months, and when I finally wrote the end, I came down with the flu for like a week.
And I'll tell you,
all I did
those obscure actors, they'll get you every time.
Yes, obscure actors are the best. So I kind of sometimes have an idea, like if I know, like when I do the murder mystery bit, I didn't know who did the murder mystery bit in The Key to All Things until I found out. So it was kind of exciting. I was like, oh my God, that's who did it. I better make sure. Yes, I actually did write why. Oh, yeah, okay. I already wrote enough to prove that this person actually did it. Oh, thank you, past me.
Isn't it amazing when you realize that you've set something up and you didn't even know you were doing it?
Yes. That's what the only thing that makes doing the second draft any fun is those moments of, oh, wow, that's really actually quite good. I might be a worthwhile writer. And then the next one, you're like, well, yeah, what the hell were you thinking?
True, though I also like the moments of, wait, this doesn't make any sense. I don't understand. This has to fit together somehow, and it doesn't fit together. And it's not, how can I make this make sense? And then, you're in the shower or you're driving somewhere and all of a sudden, boom, there it is. And you're like, oh, that's it. It's perfect.
And it always comes to you when you're in the shower or driving or somewhere where you can't write it down.
That's the scary thing. Yeah. If you're somewhere where, or if it's just so strong that you're not going to forget, that's one thing. But when you're out somewhere, with me, it tends to be smaller things, like little scenes will start to write themselves. It's like, no, I can't write this down right now. I'm driving a car. This would be very, very unsafe. Help me out. Just can you hit pause? And of course, they never do. The characters do what they want to do. They do not listen. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying. And then you're stuck trying to recreate the magic later on, which is never quite the same experience.
Yeah, it is. I've often just been like, no, I'm not going to think about you right now. Trying to bottle up the words, because if you can't sit down and write it, it never quite feels as awesome as it. You always feel like you have lost something really wonderful.
Yes.
To just sit it down right. But it's not really true, because whatever you've written instead is pretty much probably along the same lines and probably just as good, maybe even better, because you had more time to think about it. But still, you can't help but mourn the lost scenes.
And, I think it's the fact that you can't remember exactly what it was that makes it seem like it must have been lightning striking, this amazing magical thing. And it might not actually have been that much better or even that much different than what you ended up writing down, but it feels different.
Yes, it really does. It's not, it's so much easier to believe you've reached the platonic ideal when you don't have the proof in front of you.
Yes. I had it. I swear I did. And no one will ever believe me because I don't have it anymore. Yes. Oh, it's so true. It's so true. So how did you come up with this amazing idea for this book then? How did it come to you? Obviously, it must have come in pieces.
Well, mostly, like I said, it was about, that what if about, so what if this wonderful story isn't really so wonderful after all, but everybody believes? Because I was really enjoying the idea of, not enjoying is kind of cruel, but I was interested in the idea of him going to all these places and people like, oh, it's Edward de Vere. And he's the main person in this amazing story I love, and he got to live this wonderful dream, and how he deals with that weight.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't end up being that blatant about it. Actually, I kind of did, because he knows that he doesn't know that this is not the world that he belongs in. he believes it because everybody constantly it's in his ears.
Mm-hmm.
And he ends up drinking a little bit. Originally it was 5 years since his downfall, and he lost, but I made it 3 years because I felt bad for his liver. I was sitting there thinking about it. I was like, if I keep it at 5 years, no reader's going to believe that this guy should still have a liver as much as I have him drinking to try and block out the song here. So, but what the really cool part was, I realized that Avriel, that wasn't a real story, and that Avriel knew the truth for 3 hours a night. And that was what appeared to me when I was, driving through the snow going, yes, I don't have to be at work as long today. Sorry, work. I really do love you, though. I really do love my job. And I'm not just saying that because I'm terrified I'll lose it because I'm evil, but
you have a pretty cool job.
It is. I get to work with some really wonderful people. But anyway, so I was in a good mood, and I just had to start churning in my head. And that was the key that really allowed me to turn the story into a direction that I really wanted it to go instead, because I was afraid, one of the things I was afraid with the original idea was that the young woman who was kind of in love with this guy was going to be kind of pathetic. And I didn't want to write her she wasn't going to be angsty, but I didn't like that he was still stuck in this story and she was trying to heal him. I didn't like that trope because I was afraid that realistically, that's never going to work in real couples. I didn't want, I'm not very good at torturing my characters. They have to suffer for a really good reason.
Right.
So
I laugh only because I tortured one of my characters, and yeah.
Oh my God, you did!
I so did.
Such a good scene. I mean, it was horrible. It was hard to read.
It was, the awful thing about that scene is how easy it was to write it. That was the most disturbing thing in that book, was how easy it was to write.
I should make sure that I'm never on your bad side.
Yeah, and I don't want to end up talking about my book instead of yours, but I will say that writing that, and it's more than just one scene, but there's one scene that in particular, I did it because you can't run around saying that you have this horrible bad guy and that, people get taken into custody, but they might not come back out. You can't do that and then have your character be arrested and served tea and scones and how are you this morning, Dr. Martis? It doesn't work like that.
No.
No. And when you talk about caring about your character's liver, when I suddenly realized when I wrote the scene where he's arrested, I thought, oh no. And I literally apologized. I said, because I realized I couldn't be nice to him now. And I was like, I am so, so, so sorry for what I'm going to have to do to you now. Because I really like that character. But
he's one of my favorite characters. I love him.
Oh, thank you. He was so much fun to write. Well, thank you. But what shocked me, because I did do some research into, because I was like, okay, I don't want to do this, but I better figure out how I'm going to do this. What shocked me about writing it was how quickly it came. I think that was the scene that I wrote about 10 pages in an hour, and I felt like I had run a marathon when I was done. But what I realized, and what was so horrifying, was that writing these guys beating this poor man up, it was sort of like being high. And I realized when I was done, I was like, this is why people do it. The power makes you high.
Wow.
And it terrified me, because I was like, I don't really want to understand that. And yet I apparently can't not understand that now. And I don't really want to know what that means. But, I do understand when I see things on the news, especially recently, I'm like, yeah, yeah, when you have that kind of power, exercising it does things to you. It's not even so much, yes, you are exercising that power, but the power in a way is exercising you, and you need to be aware of that, and you need to really understand that it may control you more than you control it. And what does that mean for you? Which is a very unsettling thing to find yourself realizing, because I mean, if that happened to me because I wrote a scene in a book, I can only imagine what it's like when you're the one actually doing it. So many historical things made sense to me after I wrote that.
It does. And I think that's one of the, there's a trope that horror or fiction writers are the nicest people in the world because they get their bad parts out on the page. And that's one of the magical things about writing, is that you're able to research something, take it in, process it, understand it, and put it back out in a way that was very realistic and somewhat brutal and brilliantly written. And now you understand so much more than you did. And that's one of the really wonderful things about being a writer, is they always say, write what you know. And you can learn a lot of things. It's not write about being a secretary at a college, or write about being a fencing teacher or whatever. It's about learning what it's really about and processing it. And then you can put it on the page. So what you did, it was brilliant.
Yeah. Unsettling, but revelatory. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And for anybody who's listening thinking, what is this? You don't talk to your characters. They don't do their own thing. Yeah, they do. I think characters are like little sub-personalities, they really do have minds of their own, and you don't discover that until you start playing with your own, and then they do things you didn't expect, and then you think you're crazy until you start to talk to other people and you find out that no, actually that's normal. It's just that most people don't know that.
It's true. You invest a lot in creating a person that is not just another you, right? You don't, because if you wrote a book filled with Cindy's, it would be really boring in about 10 seconds. So you invest a lot creating these people out of whatever clay you can find. And a lot of that time, it is clay from your own soul. So, and you just let them go. And you say, here, tell me a story. Your story. And let it go. And that's another reason why I love writing so much, is because they do surprise you, because it's sort of like you wind them up and you say, go have fun. I've created this place for you. Tell me tell me everything. Tell me your whole life.
Yeah. When they stop talking to you, you're in trouble.
Yeah. It's usually because you've gone away without realizing. You went in the wrong direction without realizing it. And then the only thing to do is, I know a lot of people go back and reread what they've done to see where they went wrong. I sometimes can do that, but a lot of times I just let it sit and let the back of my head work on it while I go for a walk or I watch something good on TV or something. And then it'll usually unknot itself and I know what to do, and I'll just go forward. And then on the next draft, I scratch out the bad stuff and go on.
I feel like it's worth delving into that a little bit more, because I think people they think they can think it all out, that there's, it's like pieces of a puzzle or a math equation or something. And if you just keep trying different formulas or keep putting different pieces together, you're going to get it. But I think there's a whole lot to be said for letting the old subconscious chew on it and notify you when it's figured out the answer. And in fact, I think, and I know this from coaching as well as writing, a lot of the time that kind of stuff will be better than what you would have come up with anyway, especially if you try to force it. Forcing it does not work.
No, not at all. And that's why I'm always telling people, I call it feeding the muse. I'm just like, you have to constantly feed the muse. Everything you do, everything you experience goes into the back of the head. And I call it a compost heap, which is not the most romantic or charming way of describing it, but everything just goes back, like the walks you take or the things you read even. And it's not like, and you're not sitting there stealing going, oh, this Neil Gaiman book, I'm going to copy off him. I'm so going to copy everything he's just. It's not that way at all. Everything, it just goes into the back of the head and it unravels. And maybe sometime you'll see something and you'll go, that concept, I think that's something Neil Gaiman talked about in American Gods or something, because, there's folklore is the same across, right?
Right.
But it isn't thievery so much as you've taken it apart, you've let it settle down in there and mix in with everything else you've done and seen, and it comes back out as your own.
Yes.
What's important, the part about it comes back out as your own is the important part, because I would never advocate anybody snitching.
Right. Right. And I think we can get too paranoid about that too. I mean, I want to be very careful about how I say this, because there has been a raft of theft or near theft or accusations of theft ever since digital book publishing became a thing. Where, somebody somehow, whatever method they use to swipe the text and put it in a file and upload it as their own on Amazon and sell it, and then battles over whose stuff is really theirs and whose isn't, and how similar is it, and is it just that it's the same subgenre and therefore the odds are really high that you're going to come up with two very similar plots, or is it straight on theft, or is somebody just being paranoid? But I've had people say to me so many times, and I'm sure you have too, because there is this idea that if you're a writer and somebody else mentions an idea that you really like, you're not going to steal it because it's theirs, right? But at the same time, it's kind of like the 1,000 monkeys with 1,000 typewriters. If you gave 1,000 monkeys with 1,000 typewriters the same prompt, and we assume here that they speak English and can type in English, they're not going to come up with identical stories. No. I mean, a couple of them are going to be more similar than others, but they're all going to be, totally different and in their own ways. Even if it was the same basic story, the way that it's told, the nuances of the characters, that stuff is going to be different. But odds are really good that it's going to be more different than that. And so, you can take the first line of a Charles Dickens novel and use it to start your own book and end up with a completely different book from that one line. You can take the same basic situation, which is oftentimes what a prompt is, and you and I could sit down for an hour and write something and compare at the end of the hour, and they would be totally different things.
That's true.
Yeah. So there's the idea and the respect that it's somebody else's idea and they should write it. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. But I have also been in a situation with one of my grad school advisors where I happened to mention the right 3 words to her after watching a Doctor Who episode. And she said, I said, I'm wondering what that story would be. She said, I know exactly what that story is, but I can't use it because it's yours. And I said, the odds that we're going to do the same thing with it are so slim that I think you should go ahead and do it. The only downside to that is that she sent me a copy of the book and now I can't read it because I haven't figured out if I want to do anything with it on my end.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that I find I worry about way too much is my next work in progress is more modern.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to myself, oh, this is fairly unique. And then I was fooling around on Goodreads looking for my next book. And I'm like, oh, because my main character is actually a national park, and is actually at a motel outside a national park. And just sort of has ended up with all the bunch of outcasts, and she sort of watches over them. There's a Kelpie who was accused of drowning a boy. And so the Kelpie actually is the person who takes care of the lawn mowing and stuff like that. But she can't leave, things like that. And then I'm flipping through and there's a woman who has a supernatural bed and breakfast. I was like, slam. No, not going with that. I don't think that I had that's where it came from. I do, especially when you're kind of interested in, there's so many stories and they're really good stories about like the Mercy Thompson series where she's a shapeshifter and she's a coyote and she's with a werewolf pack, and so many good stories. and I love them. But I want to dabble in the werewolf area. And how do I make sure that I'm not like, I want to make sure that everything I'm doing is original, but there's only so many ways you could talk about werewolves.
Right.
So I tend to, I try not to let myself read anything touching upon what I'm writing at the time I'm writing it. So it's like, when I go back to the story after I work on something else I'm kind of interested in, I'm going to be reading nothing but like historical, like the lives of people from the past and stuff like that, like historical nonfiction, maybe some Bernard Cornwell books or something, because I don't want to feel like I'm cribbing off of somebody else's note. I want what I write to be my story, because I think that I'm okay. It's one of the few things I'm vain about. I think I'm a fairly good writer. I apologize to everyone who's listening. I'm not normally so vain, I promise. But
she's a pretty good writer.
Thank you. Well, you also have to believe in yourself, or this goes from being marginally okay to wanting to drink heavily because you just can't stand anything, because you think you're crap. And every time you get a good review, you're happy. And every time you get a bad review, you're like, I'm done. I'm never writing another word ever again. And you don't want to do that to yourself. So you have to believe in yourself. It's the only way you stay sane.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you just said so much in there. So much good stuff in there. Because, I'm thinking back to the whole debate about, and people will occasionally ask this on Quora, or just ask it in general, or just mention it as if it's fact, like, oh, but if you take a creative writing class, it's going to make you not original anymore. It's like, that's like saying if I take a calculus class, it's going to make me not be able to do calculus as well as I could. I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
You need the tools. You have to have the tools.
You have to have the tools, but you also have to read books. You can't, there is nothing to gel in the back of your head if you're trying to work in a vacuum.
Yes.
It can't
read widely. That way.
Yeah. And I mean, my whole grad school program was based on the idea of, read things that have accomplished the things you want to do so that you see how you might do them. And you're not going to go and copy that exact thing, but it will inspire something else. It gives you more to pull from.
Yes.
And it also means that you've had to learn from something you've read, which hopefully is a skill that once developed, you'll never stop doing, whether it's conscious or not. But yeah, that people get paranoid about that too.
Yeah, and it's a shame, because if you read widely, like you might never want to write a romance novel, but you want to read, especially if let's say you're a gentle person, a man, and you want to write something that has a romantic element in it. You should be reading romance novels written by women, so that you aren't just writing romance from a man's perspective, because as we all know, men and women see what's romantic differently. So you need to teach yourself these things, and that's an easy, palatable way to do it. And also, it teaches you their expectations. You want to learn, so you want to read widely so you can understand people's expectations when they pick up a mystery, or they pick up a comedy novel or whatever. But also, sometimes you might never read science fiction, but there might be some clever ways that this writer puts phrases that you want to learn how to do. And the best way to do it is to sit down and just read how they do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of you've got me thinking about P.G. Wodehouse now, who I would say is inimitable, except that Douglas Adams did a mighty good job.
Yes, he did.
Not exactly the same. And yet you can see it. You can, I discovered Adams first, and then I found Wodehouse. And as soon as I started reading it, I thought, oh, somebody definitely read this. And as much as I love it, I'm intimidated by the idea of trying to imitate that, because it is such a particular style, but it can still influence how you string words together. There can be little bits of it that creep in there. And it's back to what we were saying before, then it's your thing. It's your take on how to write this kind of thing, or how to use language, maybe applied in a completely different way. I mean, I don't know if there's anybody who took Wodehouse's style and tried to apply it to a historical romance novel. Boy, wouldn't that be amazing?
Oh my God, that would be amazing. Oh, that'd be
Or it could be absolutely horrible. One or the other, probably not much in the middle. but it's still, Douglas Adams is still demonstrably Douglas Adams. It's not Jeeves and Wooster in space,
true.
And so I think that's a great example of how something can influence you without you becoming a copycat.
That's brilliant. I love that.
So I want to back up a little bit because I feel like we skipped over everything between high school and college, and I've published a book. So can you talk a little bit about that process, moving from one to the next? I mean, I know you once said to me something like, I have done literally every kind of work you can do around publishing a book. I have edited, I have written, I have copy edited, I have proofread, so there's a lot of stuff that goes in there. I don't know how easy it is to encapsulate all of that.
Well, there's two ways to see the story. Because of the twists and turns of life, I have not always been as focused on writing as I should have been. But I did. I've been a book reviewer, and by being a book reviewer, that reminded me a lot of the stuff that I learned in college about how to read something critically, but while still being a reader. Because when you're in college, you're a student. You're reading something critically so that you can say something that we hope will get you a decent grade.
Right. That's really it. Yes.
When you're reading as a book reviewer, you're reading it critically to figure out what you want to say to the person who's going to read your book review, so that they have a good grasp of the story, yet don't feel betrayed by you. If they read it, they're like, this is the most, you said this was a really fantastic novel, and this is garbage. What the heck did you do to me? So it's, it made me see books a different way, and the same thing again, but again, it's a different hat. You're not sitting there as a reader so much, because the book reviewer is the reader's best friend. The editor is the writer's best friend. And so you're sitting there trying to figure out how to make sure that there's no spinach stuck in their teeth, or there's showing, and all the other stuff, because you're trying. And so you read it in a different way. And that taught me how to read my stuff, to edit it on when I'm like about the third draft, I'm really doing the critical editing. So I edited for some magazines. I edited for a company, and I worked for AOL for a while and interviewed authors, and that was fun. I interviewed for Gotta Write and a whole bunch of places. I did a lot of author interviews, and it was fun talking to people and finding out, like what you're doing now. You find out how they tick creatively, and that's a lot of fun. And it also kind of sometimes gives you ideas about, that explain how you work too. But a lot of times, like I sometimes say that I'm three different people. I'm the fencer girl who is like, no, we're going to go out and fence because you're years old and you only have a few more years where you'll be effective on the field. Then there's the writer who's like, screw you. You take all the time. I want to sit here and write and tell these stories. And then there's the normal woman who's just trying to keep a job, be a decent daughter, all that stuff. And he's trying to keep peace between these two assholes who are, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to curse.
It's okay.
Good. I swear I was trying to be good.
It's fine. Don't worry about
it. Jerk faces who want to do whatever they want to do. They're both unreasonable. So, it's balancing a life and trying to be a writer at the same time is really freaking hard. That's what I was trying to say. I should have just said that.
It's all right. But you're not wrong. It's like you have all of these conflicting things that you're trying to be all of these people, do all these things at the same time, and you still only have the same 24 hours in a day. And with any luck, a third of those are earmarked for the sleep part.
Yeah, my writing career between college and that has just been trying to get things written, trying to get established. I did a lot of stuff because I was hoping to get established as, oh, I recognize her name from book reviews or reviews, interviews or whatever. Maybe I'll read her book. And then there was such a lapse between that part and getting published that I totally wasted any headway I might have gotten because, my father was gravely ill and I was just dealing with so much that it really, and I really love fencing. So all those things have slowed down this part of my life. So basically I just, and I get so angry with myself, but the thing I wanted to express is it's important that you understand that you shouldn't be angry with yourself over this stuff. I know there's a lot of people who are listening who probably have a work in progress in fragments on their computer or in the classic in the desk drawer.
Yeah.
And you get mad at yourself because you're like, how do I do everything and get to create? Maybe I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it next. I'll do it when I retire. And just don't get angry at yourself and remember that you are worth the half an hour or the hour that you can squeeze in to write when you can do it, make progress when you can, and forgive yourself. Be kind to yourself because if you just keep at it, eventually you will get a book and then you can start over and you can edit it. Don't worry about, some people just start over and over and over again. Don't worry about that. Just write it. Even if it's like you start out as being a story about cats who live in a forest and it ends up being about, a woman who likes to bake marshmallow pies that are poisonous. It's okay. Don't start over. Just write it out and then go, okay, now I know what I need to do to make the cats become a woman who poisons people with marshmallow pies. Okay. And then you know where you need to go to write your next draft. So that's all.
You never know what you have until you've written it.
Yes. Especially when it's like a mystery or something, then you need to be able to go back and go, okay, I'm putting this gun in the drawer here now. Yeah. So chapter 12, the gun will be there in chapter 12.
Yeah. Yeah. Mysteries are so much harder, I think. But then I haven't ever really played with writing one because of that, because it just feels like too many pieces to figure out. But before we get too far away from it, I want to say, so this book that's coming out is book number what?
Oh, gosh. I've written 4 novels. I have a short story collection. And this is the 5th book and the 6th. If you count the short story collection as its own thing that sits on a shelf, it's the 6th.
And you've edited some anthologies and things too,
yes.
Right?
I did when I was with Drollery Press. I edited a couple of anthologies. And I haven't gotten back into that work. I should. I wonder if I could, because that's fun. Working with other people and like figuring out how the stories all fit together as a whole is actually kind of fun. But
I just want to point out that I'm pulled in too many different directions and I haven't spent as much time writing as I should, has a shelf full of things that she has written or collected or edited in spite of that. So,
Now I feel uncomfortably humble.
No, I just think it's important to acknowledge because we don't give ourselves credit for the things that we've done. We focus on, I haven't done enough of this and I haven't done enough of that. And meanwhile, there's, 6, 7 books on a shelf with your name on them that are not factoring into this conversation. And I'm sure that there are people listening to this who have done the same thing with whatever it is that they do, even if it's just not giving themselves credit for running the dishwasher and doing the laundry because there are 3 things that they hope to get to that they didn't get to. Well, you still got to those 2. We're way too hard on ourselves about stuff like this.
We are. And you would think magically, let's say if you were, I bet even Neil Gaiman does it to himself, or
probably
Bernard Cornwell, or anybody you can think of who you've seen on a bookshelf in Barnes and Noble. They probably do the same thing because the goalposts always move.
Mm-hmm.
And you're always thinking what you have to do to get to the next level, so to speak. And I don't know that we ever sit back and go, well, I'm not doing badly right now. And that's one of the things, it's a really good point you made. If you get up, especially in times like these when everything is kind of cruddy around us,
mm-hmm.
if you get up and you feed yourself and you start the dishwasher and you do one thing that makes you happy, and one thing that makes you feel like maybe you move forward, even if it's only like 5 minutes of putting something away. it's still a victory.
Yeah, it's not nothing. It's way more than nothing. But we treat that stuff like it's nothing.
And I think that's one of the things that we do that's wrong, because I think we keep putting so much pressure on ourselves that it crushes all pleasure in some, but also because it just keeps you down, and you don't need to do that to yourself. The world will do it for you, as my mother used to tell me. She would, if I went into the other room and asked her, she'd tell me the same thing. I wanted to put that in because I made it sound like she wasn't here anymore, and I was like, here.
She's here. But it's funny because I was at a content conference the other week, which is like the people who write things that go on websites and things like that. And one of the speakers talked about how a lot of websites don't work very well, in part because we throw so much stuff on them because we just feel like we have to produce. And I think that applies in lots of other contexts. It's like we were talking about earlier, the subconscious can't bubble stuff up to you if you are so busy focusing on all of the conscious stuff and trying so hard to do it all yourself. It can't get through. It also doesn't have it can work regardless, but not as well as if you give yourself time to sit down and read a book or stare out the window for 10 minutes, which I feel like, the gods of American capitalism are going to come and strike me down for saying that. But there's nothing wrong with staring out the window for 10 minutes. Sometimes you really need to just do nothing. And we've gotten to the point where so often I wonder what the heck we think we're making all of this stuff for. We talk about productivity. Well, but why? Why is being productive this mark of status and worth? If, do we even know what we're producing and why we're producing it?
It is. It's absolutely a good point, because I think sitting and letting yourself just be is such a lost art.
Yes.
And it's something that, I was trying to sit outside. I have a pavilion, a little gazebo that I put up every year. It's got lights. It's got a little fountain that trickles.
Ooh, nice.
Sitting there, and I've got flowers all around. And I was like trying to make myself sit there for more than 1 minute, and it was impossible because I kept on. I couldn't shut off. And why do, like you said, why is this not? I think we value productivity over people's lives. We act like, did you do something right this second? If you're not every second, you're wasting your life. You're wasting everything. You're wasting my money.
Right.
And it's like, why do you care? If the job's getting done, why can't I just sit and be at peace? If I'm doing what you pay me for and everybody's happy, just let me alone.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine that very many people get to their deathbed and say, boy, I wish I had churned out more stuff just to churn out more stuff. I just, I have not been on my deathbed, and I'm hoping not to find out for a very long time yet. But just on a gut level, that feels totally off to me, that anyone would think that. It's like, you hear that all the time. Nobody ever got to the end of their life and said, boy, I wish I spent more time at the office. We are very good at prioritizing the wrong things, us humans, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that that's one of the reasons why we're having protests now, because we're having unemployment's high, everything. There's so many problems right now because we don't value people as much as we value what they do for us. And it's wrong. We need to value the human being, and we need to make sure that they're taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
Every person has a certain level of things they deserve. And I don't want to I'm getting political, so I'm going to stop because I don't want to make this a rant. But we need to take care of people, and we need to realize that people are more important than the bank account.
Mm-hmm.
And if we do that, then they'll read our books and they'll be happier and life will be fine. Look, that's the point.
But as you say that, I'm thinking, we would never hold children to the standards that we hold ourselves. And we say that it's because, they're just children. And yet children in general tend to be a lot happier, especially the young children, because they get to play, they get to be creative, they get to just be. Yeah, they're not any better at being bored than the rest of us, but they also don't get so hung up on it because they haven't been trained yet that their job is to make widgets. And
Yes.
that is your life, is you are the widget maker. And the irony of that is that I feel like we have turned ourselves into the widgets. We're trying
Yes.
to be this cookie cutter thing that has to, adhere to all of these rules. And most of these rules are just rules that we made up. In fact, I'm wondering, did you ever, when you started writing when you were 13 or in high school, or frankly, I think this happens at any age, did you ever have issues with anybody saying, oh, yes, of course you have to go work on your little story now? Did you ever hear that, or were you lucky enough not to?
When I was younger, I had, my parents were always fine with me writing. I lived out in the middle of nowhere. So if my parents knew that I was safely doing something that meant putting outside in the road or doing anything, they were quite happy. And my parents were always fairly supportive of my writing, and my mother's really supportive. And I've had men, though, the people I was, interested, conversating and dating, who were sort of a little bit like patronizing sometimes. And it's like, but, I actually had someone say, well, you're not going to want to write when you're married. You're going to be too. And I was like, throwing out the whole man.
I think that was probably a wise call. I mean, it's funny because I think, again, I want to be careful how I say this because I'm not a painter and I am a musician, but I'm not that, out playing gigs kind of musician, and photographer and whatever. I mean, I think it's so easy to try to downgrade art into something that's not for grownups. And I've heard it most in a writing context. I'm sure that it happens in other places, oh, right, I'm not as important as your painting. And that, yeah, I like your criterion. Just throw that whole idea away with that person if possible, because if they're going to do that to you about your creative pursuits, they're going to do it in other places.
Yes. You shouldn't have to hide who you are to make someone else happy.
Right.
So, I've been, I had a relationship where, it was tempting to hide books under the couch because this person thought that I had way too many books. And I was like, wait a second. Is this the kind of life you want? I'm not going to be a book hiding wench. I'm going to be buy me more bookshelves. Wench.
Build me more bookshelves.
Oh, that was how I spent all of February, was building bookshelves because I'd finally reached critical mass. Yes, I got fairly good at it. I have a new room with its bookshelf palooza, and when the wall bows and you think I can't put my bookshelf straight and have 8 foot of books, cut them in half and they'll just naturally fold it. It's great. There you go. Carpentry tips from the writer who knows nothing.
Oh, that's fantastic. You're reminding me that about 8 years ago, I got rid of 400 or 500 books. I call it the Great Book Purge of 2012. And the funny thing is that I still have trouble remembering which ones I have and which ones I don't anymore.
Well, you need a list. I have a list. Like, I literally, when I go to the bookstore, I pull my cell phone out and get up my Google spreadsheet because I can't remember what I owed. I have bought too many second copies of books. Sometimes I still do because I get lazy and don't look. Because I remember nothing. I have the memory of a well-meaning goldfish. I need a list.
And this is the librarian in you coming out. You are your own librarian, my dear.
True. This is true.
If I were, then probably I wouldn't have spent as much time in the last week as I have looking for a couple of books that I know have to be here somewhere. But I don't know where they got to, unless I lent them to someone and don't remember who it was.
Oh, you put them somewhere safe.
Somewhere safe is the most dangerous place on this planet.
Now I've got a vision of these books, with little pew pew guns going like across the desert, trying to save themselves so they could get back home.
These are not the books you're looking for. As we go full geeky book nerd, which we could probably do for the rest of the day.
Oh God! Don't get me started. Nobody will have any respect for me.
That's not true. That's not true at all. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else to ask you, because we're about, at time, and I know that you have things you need to do, but there's a little bit of time left. I don't know. Is there anything that you've learned from writing that you wish other people knew or that you wish you'd learned sooner?
I think that it is mostly, and I think I touched on it before, where the most important thing is that drafts are your best friend. So you write the first draft and you just let the words out, let them fall where they go. Then you write a second draft where you start to now you know what you need to know. So you can go back through. And then and you don't start from the very beginning. You don't like trash anything. You just open Word again and go up to the top and work your way down. Someone actually looked at me in horror once and said, "You rewrite everything?" And I'm like, "Oh, honey, no. It's why Word's so awesome, because it's still there. You just get to tweak it." And then, the third draft is your sit down and make sure that all the bruises are okay and healed up and no scratches. Doesn't look like it's been tussling too much with the people and the other kids in the playground. Band-Aids are great and all that stuff. And then, a fourth draft is necessary, because after that, people read it. You get a reader who isn't just going to be like, "I love you so much. Of course I love your book." You want someone who reads a lot. My mother's actually really good because she reads so much and so widely that she's actually able to tell me a lot of the problems. And, you get your editor to do it. And then you got your fourth draft. Sometimes this book actually had a few extra drafts because by virtue of it being Avriel doesn't remember, Avriel remembers. There's stories overlapping. And if you don't actually live in my head, which thank God you don't, because I'm sure it's a very strange place. It doesn't, you have to be very, very careful. Everything makes sense to the people who don't live inside your head. So drafts are good, and don't be afraid of them, and be nice to yourself. There. I think those are all my lessons and all my sage advice.
Oh, good stuff. Yeah. Being nice to yourself is I think the foundation of all of the rest of it. And sometimes the hardest thing to do. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Thank you.
Well, this has been a blast. I can't believe we finally did it and now it's over.
Oh, I know. I'm so depressed because I've had so much fun. And it went so fast. Are you sure? No, it's time. Oops.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad we finally managed to do it.
And thank you all of you who are listening. I hope that you enjoyed yourselves, and I hope that I didn't blather on too much.
That's this week's episode. Thanks so much to Cindy Lynn Speer for joining me. Do check out the show notes at fycuriosity.com. And if you know someone who would appreciate this episode, please pass it on. Thanks. You can find show notes, the 6 creative beliefs that are screwing you up, and more at fycuriosity.com. I'd also love for you to join the conversation on Instagram. You'll find me at fycuriosity. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners. See you next time.